Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Like we say on this show, it all depends the time zone from where you are watching. Welcome to The Leader, courtesy of the Evangelical Alliance of Kenya and Catalyst on Hope Media. Today's subject is one many of us, truth be told, may have grappled with. Is it right to question God? And to help us unpack, I'm so honored to have with us in studio my pastor, my friend, my dad, Reverend Gishinga. Karibu sana.
Asante sana, Edmund.
And then also to my left, my very good friend, Pastor Edward Ondachi.
Thank
Karibu.
you. Thank you for the invitation, Edmund. Thank you.
Wow. I'm so honored to be in your presence. Let's dive into it, Reverend Gishinga. I met you in the lift coming up, and you looked familiar. How would you introduce yourself?
How do I introduce myself?
Yes.
This is a good one.
A young man of only 74,
Yes.
born in a big family, proud. I usually say number 8 of 18, but the firstborn of my mother.
Yes.
And one who is loved by the Lord Jesus Christ. And I try to reciprocate by loving him. That's me.
Wow. What are you involved in? What are you doing right now?
I am retired. I worked at the Nairobi Baptist Church for 25 years. Before that, I had worked with students in colleges and universities for 9 years. And after I retired from Nairobi Baptist Church, I worked for World Relief as a global chaplain for almost 10 years. So I put together, I was involved in Christian ministry for 45 years. I'm enjoying retirement and doing some farming.
Oh, yeah.
And putting down some reflections.
Wonderful.
Yes.
When I grow up, I want to be like you.
Thank you, everyone.
Pastor Ondachi,
Yes, sir.
over to you. We now met after meeting with Reverend Gishinga on the corridors. And I said, hey,
This guy.
who is this guy? Who are you?
Edmund, I grew up with you under Reverend Gishinga's leadership, so we are here excited to listen to him. But I just turned 55. Been married to Yvette for 24 years. We have 2 sons. I've been a pastor for about 22 years. I actually was mentored by Reverend Gishinga at the Nairobi Baptist Church. We worked together for many years in so many ways, me and many of my colleagues are who we are because of his leadership. So I'm really excited to be here today. I'm currently a publisher, and I think we'll be touching into that a little bit later. But I look forward to becoming like Reverend Gishinga one day with a profile as wide and as big as his, to be able to proudly say that I am now happily retired and enjoying my retirement. I look forward
to that.
Saying that one day.
But there's something, Reverend Gishinga, that Pastor Ondachi and I have in common. When you look at our fingers, on the 18th of March, the year 2000, you presided over my wedding. And similarly...
1999 December.
1999 December?
Just a few months before you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, same. You presided over our wedding.
Have we done justice in those who you said...
A pastor is always so happy to see couples that we wedded still together and happily so. So both you, Edmund and Edward, and your spouses, deeply thankful to God for us, for you, and staying together, and clearly staying happy. Very happy.
We are humbled, and we thank God for you.
Yeah, yeah, we do.
There are times I have struggled with this. I've asked questions. I'm almost questioning God, and I feel guilty. That is the crux of the matter. So I asked the question, is it right to question God? Or can we ask God questions? Do you have biblical context? Have you gone through it yourself?
Edmund, it's a routine to question God. Because there are so many things he allows us to be in, so many spaces that cause us to question him. And so I would say, yes, it's right to question God. There are myriad examples of men and women who questioned God. I remember, for example, Mary, when she was told, you are going to be the mother of the Lord Jesus, God incarnate. And it's like, how can this be? I don't have a husband, so how can this be? I remember Moses talking to God and asking, did I give birth to these people? That they're asking for food, they're asking for water, we are in the wilderness. Did I give birth to them? And so it's right. God, people, men and women have questioned God, and it's right to question God.
Wow. I could see Pastor Ondachi agreeing. So you and I in the same WhatsApp group of asking questions.
We're in the same group. Yes, yes.
But what would be the ethical way of doing it? Do you send him a memo? Do you just ask in the mind? Or what do you think? How have you done it?
I think our deepest questions, Edmund, are asked in our hearts. Because you just reach certain moments of doubt because of how God introduces himself vis-a-vis what you're going through. You wonder when there's a contradiction there. For me personally, the thing which puzzles me a lot is the idea of God's ambiguity. When I was young as a believer, I used to think that God presents himself as a very clear person. But often you discover Jesus spoke a lot of parables, was not very clear. The biggest ambiguity about God is he will never reveal to you what's coming. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 minutes. When we are struck by bereavement, when we are struck by failure, my first question to God is, why didn't he tell me? but is he obligated to tell me? So that's the question, right? Because if I'm walking with a friend, you, for example, of Reverend Gishinga, who has recently become a good friend of mine and was my boss before, if he knew thugs are coming to attack us in the next 15 minutes, I expect him to tell me, to warn me.
If he knew, yes, you're right.
Especially if he knew.
Yes.
But you see, God does know, but he still doesn't tell us. And for me, that's where I find my biggest struggle there. But then shortly then you remember, he is God and I am not. And sometimes it just requires that I trust him rather than, than doubt him. That I have to trust his intention is good. But my biggest questions often are inside my heart, wondering whether he even loves me. Like he says he does. Like why would he allow this to happen? So like the Reverend is saying, it's almost routine. we go through it almost as a routine, that our questions keep coming up because we are human and he is God.
And you know, Edmund, to build upon what Edward Ondachi is saying, it's not just a question that he doesn't reveal to us. Sometimes we even have a question as to whether he cares.
Yes.
Even whether he is able.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get into that spot where we are not... There's a part of us that starts to question that. Edward, you call it ambiguity. That unclear space. And that's where I find, for example, the 3 young men that were being put in the fire, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's the spot in which they were when they said to the king,
even if
we know you can, but even if you do not. That ambiguity. But sometimes we get into a space where we even start to wonder, it's not just a question of you can, but you wouldn't, But we also sometimes enter into a space where we wonder, if you can, then why don't you?
Exactly. We're getting to the deep waters. That's a big one.
And indeed, is it then born or where as man, I can see, I can feel, I can reach, I can touch, then I know, then I believe. That sense of predictability, and in a sense of reaching out someone who, you know, will deliver to match my expectation. And in the instance of the Bible, let's look at a couple of narratives where God was asked questions, and what are the outcomes? And what does it speak to? Matter of faith.
I see Jeremiah telling God, you know, you deceived me. And I got deceived.
You played me.
You played me.
You properly. That's a big accusation.
Because you told me
Yes.
you knew me in my mother's womb.
Yes.
In fact, you said when you formed me,
Yes.
you had a plan.
Wow, that's a big one.
You said you will go to kings and you will change things. And here I am finding myself in a predicament. I'm in a situation where I am actually being threatened with death, and they may get the better of me. So you cheated me, you deceived me, and I got deceived.
Properly deceived.
And yet, the interesting thing is when we have walked with God, Jeremiah comes back and says, but I know. There is this thing burning in me, and I know it's from you. My mind is questioning, but within my heart there is something that is saying, you know, he called me. He is true to his word. He will do what he said he will do. And so I feel this fire within me. I have to get it out. So we live in that situation where there is a measure of ambivalence, apparent contradiction,
Yes.
but deep within, where the more we have walked, the longer we have walked with the Lord,
Yeah.
we know there is no contradiction.
Yes.
And yet, moments come when we need to vocalize it, and when we feel it, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Let me bring this to current context that we're in, even as a nation. It seems we are agreeing and know that it's not wrong to ask God questions. And what about questioning God? Is there a difference? Am I then questioning the authority of God? And now when I'm looking at even as we're here, we live in Kenya, and we have leaders, be it in the home, be it in church, be it in a political space, to ask questions. And just because I'm governor, I'm president, I'm MP, and I can't stomach or tolerate, or me, I don't mind, but I've got my team who are you to ask, Bana? Give Pastor Ondachi his 5 years. Don't ask questions. Let him deliver. If he can't, what's your comment?
I'm very influenced by the leadership of Reverend Gishinga, because I was very impressionable and young when I started my internship at the Baptist Church, and then I got employed there. The first thing I learned about leadership watching Reverend Gishinga is he was not insecure as a person. And we were not even an easy lot to work with. We asked the worst questions. We gave him a lot of gray hairs.
I can count some.
My
Which are
colleagues and
yours?
myself. But I found him very non-defensive. In fact, even today, you ask Reverend Gishinga a hard question, he'll welcome it and then answer it. It's not what I see in our political space. It's not what I've seen in a lot of other leadership spaces. And I think later on you realize how spoiled you were growing up. I think if you spread it to the political space, you discover Somebody said that leadership doesn't change us, it reveals us. And when someone looks like they do not want to be asked a question, it says something about what it reveals to you about them. And I think, of course, the greatest civil servant is the president. And the political leaders are essentially our employees. We need to ask them questions because we need to own our country. We need to put them on account because they swore on certain principles to lead us that way. And I think that would be okay to be able to ask questions so that we own our nation, we participate in its development. I think that is essential and clear. Sometimes in our youngness, our questions can seem very arrogant, but what we need to participate, one of the things I've learned about leadership is essentially the leaders we pick are a reflection of who we are. And so we need to know that we own that space, all of us together, to be able to put them to account and to ask them questions is right, and it's even necessary for us to be able to do. But my shock had been, whereas I encountered leaders who were very secure in their space and in their leadership and assured of their calling, they welcomed the questions. But sometimes you find when you go to other spheres, it's not the same. Of course, we know where we've come from. It would be dangerous to ask leadership some questions. It would land you in a lot of trouble because of the questions you ask. So it depends on who the question is landing on. Mm-hmm. But the principle of asking it, I think, is always correct. Mm.
I'm hoping he said or asked for forgiveness, because I've counted about a third of the gray hairs for this man here.
I confirm they gave me quite a bit of difficult time, but they are my best friends because in that we all grew together. So I'm thankful to God for them, every one of them. Now, I agree with Edward Ondachi completely. But let me go a little further to my childhood. My father had 3 wives. And when I was about age 7, and I had 2 sisters, my father had a quarrel with my mother and sent her home, back home to her parents for retraining. I don't know what quarrel they had. I don't know what retraining he needed her to get. And I had to look after my 2 sisters. And I was very angry. You have 2 other wives. And you leave me to look after my 2 sisters when you are being taken care of. I was 7. My father died when I was about 57. I never raised the question. I never told him, you did bad to me. The culture did not allow us to question. That is wrong. My father and I were good friends. I should have had the freedom to ask him, why did you do this? And my father, can you forgive me for the hurt I felt? And I feel God is one who can entertain questions because he is secure, like Edward you have said. He is secure. He is our God. And so when we come to the political leadership in our country at any given time, present, past, future, if a leader does not allow criticism, expression of pain that people are feeling, I agree with Edward. 1, it is a sense and expression of insecurity. But they could also, like my father, have been brought up in a particular culture. The leader is a king, cannot be questioned.
Very autocratic.
Exactly.
My word is law.
Exactly. My word is law. Who are you to question me? But I would say very clearly, in my view, that is not our Father in heaven. That's not his model. His model is to allow us to question and pour out our pain.
True. Speaking about asking questions, then we get into another, you've touched on doubt and certainty. Are they in the same space when we're asking questions, or God, ourselves, leaders? There are times here we are, the topic, yes, is it try to question God, but at times also we ask ourselves questions. When you reflect, we are family people. In the workplace, you made a decision, and you ask, but you realize you're asking yourself, who's then meant to give the answer?
Doubt, uncertainty is part of human nature. And yet, it does not negate, does not disqualify the essence, the depth of who we are. I'm thinking of Paul saying, if Christ did not rise from the dead, then of all people, we are most to be pitied.
Yes.
You know, I sense like Paul was saying, supposing we were wrong,
Just in case.
supposing
Bullseye.
we were wrong,
Yes.
supposing we get there, and yet with his last breath,
Yes. Yes.
Paul preached this gospel of good news of a risen Christ Jesus.
Will be the laughing stock.
Exactly. So a moment of doubting, questioning, in my view, is apparently deep, apparently superficial, and yet the two go together. In other words, the core believes. And I may give a bit of an example, with your permission,
Please.
Edmund.
Yes, please.
In 2010, I lost a wife of 32 years.
Yes, I remember. Amen.
And when I lost Emmy, I asked God, or I said to God, I had discussion with God, and I said, tie my leg with a chain to yourself and allow the other leg to be free so that you and I can have a conversation. Did you have to take my wife? Did you have to take away the mother of my two children? And it happened actually 3 days before our first grandchild was born. So she never had the joy of seeing and embracing her first grandchild. And it's like, God, are you fair? So, you see, one side of me says, I know you are God. You are right. You do all things well. So tie that leg to yourself. But the other leg, let me wonder and ask the questions that I need to ask. And that was 2010. This is 2024. 24. It's actually January 2010, and this is January 2024. So it's 24 years now. Actually, she passed on 28th of January. So it's just almost
almost to the day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I have no doubt 14 years later that me having that conversation with God was what allowed me to heal and to be healed and to move on.
Wow.
And my faith is deeper today than it was then. So doubt, questioning is not the same as disbelief or unbelieving.
Very well said.
Wow. Thank you for that testimony and vulnerability.
Thank you.
We appreciate, don't take it for granted. Pastor Ondachi, I'm turning back to you. Then what would you see or encourage or suggest as a way or strategy to, as you're navigating through this, still maintaining the faith?
I found that God is not shy to grow us through pain. He's not shy to do that. He allows something to hit you so hard and assures you that you'll come out well. But, you know, there are scriptures that say, when you go through the fire, I will be with you. When you go through the water, I will be with you. I used to ask God, like, foolish questions. Like, don't even be with me, just take away the fire. You know, he was, why do you want to be with me in the fire? Because my mind could not see a picture of me and the King of the universe inside a fire. You know, why? Why that discomfort? For what? It doesn't make sense, because why would you take your young child and pass with him through corridors of horror? For what reason? If it was not to grow him, if it was not for a good intention, if it was not that you want him to, if it was not necessary. And like Reverend Gishinga is saying, I have grown the most through pain and discomfort. And when you think of our leaders, who wants a leader who has not been tested?
You'll be experimenting.
You know,
we'll be doubting.
Testing makes us heavy.
It does.
Makes us trustworthy. We want a person who has been through it. We want a person who, when they speak, we can sense the gravitas of their authority in a certain situation. We certainly want that of our political leaders. You don't want somebody who was handed over a presidency easily. You want someone who has fought for it, who wants it, who has been through something. And it's the same for us. When it comes, and I've had people speaking over my life, even prophetically, and said, you're going to go through something. And it won't be easy, but the Lord will be with you through it. And I'm wondering, wow. And you know, it really does come and hits you like a train. And you find yourself, I had a leadership disagreement with a very close friend of mine. And it appears to have come from nowhere. And in just a few months, I found myself without an email address. You know, the whole workspace had become my identity. My work was my life because of how much I'd given myself to it. Suddenly, I had nothing to do. You know, the most embarrassing question becomes, so what do you do these days? And you're wondering, how do I even answer that question? And going through that tunnel, going through that trouble. I remember going through diarrhea every day for a month. Wow. I didn't even know that anxiety can spike diarrhea. I knew it at that time. But I remember that time is when I got the best advice, is when my faith grew the deepest, is when God became real in a different way to me, when the need for God was greater than any other time, when I needed to identify myself not as a pastor, not as a husband, not as an artist, not as all the other things people identify me with, but as a child of God. Everything is stripped away and you are left just with God. And then late after that, I realized a certain depth had happened. You know, like a fire came, took away, burnt away everything. You are left with a stalk.
You're refined now.
That starts to regrow. And you discover other things. So it's not pleasant when it's happening. I can't even begin to imagine what it looks like to lose a wife. But we've watched Reverend Gishinga go through it. And for him to say he's deeper now 14 years later is deeply encouraging. It was very unpleasant because we knew Amy well. She was...
She was mom to us.
Yeah, she was. And when that happened, you feel the bewilderment. But then you see this, you see the fruit of it later, and you are left with a deeper faith in God. That's very encouraging to hear.
Wow. Picture with me this. You've got these disciples. If there was anybody who was closest to, these are the disciples who walked, who even performed miracles, who were with the Master himself and learning at his feet in a boat. Then the storm comes. But he's in a corner somewhere, sleeping like a baby. And they're wondering, hey, things are thick. And they look at him and waking up. What's wrong with you? How does he react? He comes up and there's a lesson there. And you'll always keep seeing lessons from, that's the power of the living word of God. And he stills the storm. But he says to his disciples, you of little faith. So the encouragement here is those who are watching and those who are listening and those who know us. When you look up at our leaders, we see you as invincible. And he is saying, you cry. You leaders cry.
The passage that Edward Ondachi referred to Edmund is not if you pass through the water or if you pass through the fire.
Yes.
It's when.
When. Not if. When.
Now it's when.
Yeah, it will. It's
It
when.
will.
It's not an issue of if.
And it looks like God's children, men and women, we will pass through the fire at one point or another. And the beauty is, if you have passed through where Edward has passed through, that space where you wake up and you had given your all to your job, and today you don't have your job, and you don't know where it is coming from, he can hold someone else's hand and say, you are going to pass through here.
Yeah.
Or you are passing through this section of the journey. I actually walked through it. It's interesting to find, for example, how easily widowed men and women can identify with me. Because unless you have passed through some space, people think you are talking from the head. When you have passed through a particular experience and section of life's journey, men and women can look and say, you have passed through there. You can understand me not with your head only, but deeper, it's the heart. So we stop giving people sympathy and we give them empathy. Just hold their hand and say, let's move along. We are together.
Wow, and here we are. How then do we empathize with our leaders when we're saying crying is not necessarily wrong or a sign of weakness? And you might find expression in other gifts that God gives. I mean, I know you're a designer, you're an artist. Maybe you ventilate through that. So that when I look at that painting and I say, this is telling me something, and maybe it was inspired by the pain or capturing a moment that was intended that use it that way. Have you ever felt that way when you are inspired?
Yes, many artists, musicians, certainly the best songs are said to be the saddest, and the ones that are sung from the heart, through experiences, through loss, through betrayal. Those are the best songs, that because they identify with something that we are. So many artists, actually, their craft is their expression of frustration. Frustration, joy, it's an emotional vent through which you find you want to say something. And the mystery of it is that you express it and someone who doesn't know you, has never met you, reads that emotion from what they are seeing. It's absolute magical to see it that way. God is an amazing creative in the way that he allows our communication to happen that way. So yeah, it's one of them. And it's very therapeutic. It's very therapeutic when you ventilate it out, and after that you actually feel better. Wow. It's a form of crying.
Yeah.
You feel relief that the event is.
What about you as pastor? When I see you prepare on Sunday, are these always expressions of what you've gone through and connection? And I mean, the times I listen and you've preached and I say, this was not for us, this was for me.
I think when we pour out genuinely from our hearts, what God and us are talking together. Someone has defined prayer, not often how we often tend to define it, as something structured in this way. Someone says prayer is a conversation with God about the things we are doing together.
Oh. Wow.
A conversation between God and I about the things He and I are doing together. And so I want to agree with my friend Edward. Just like in art, when you are pouring your heart, whether it's in music, in a painting, and perhaps even in a book, in a preaching, Edmund, my best sermons are when I have talked with God. And I know I have connected with Him. And I'm asking, so-and-so is, I'm preaching at a memorial service, at a funeral service. How do I address this family? At the core that I can't touch, only you can touch. When He and I have talked, that is God and I have talked, and I pour that out, then I am able to reach out these people and be of greater use than if it is just from the head. Yeah. And so in a similar manner, I think you are talking about tears, Edmund. Tears are right. It's a pouring of our emotions. And my observation is that when we don't allow ourselves to cry, whether it is in bereavement, whether it is a spouse who has walked away and left another and you are left, I think the feelings are the same. Bereavement and desertion produce the same kind of effect. And there are men, both men and women, who at 4 a.m. wake up wailing. And it's okay. We need to wail. And I suspect even politicians who have lost an election and you have poured all your money, sold your property, and now you are ending bankrupt. There are times to just pour yourself out and cry and say, I did something stupid. I should at least have drawn a line up to this far in terms of what I will expend and what I will not expend. And this is why I identify with Edward. We pastors tend to give our all. We have no reserve.
No reserve at all.
And so when you come to a roadblock and you have given your all, you didn't even spend time to invest for tomorrow. You gave your all, even in relationships, you gave your all to the church. There are moments to just grieve when you go through hurt. So whether it is in church, whether it is in politics, or any other leadership, when we pass through the waters, when we pass through the fire, there are moments to have a conversation with God. And if it means shedding tears, let them flow. It's okay.
But then there could also be tears of joy.
Not when you are going through the fire. Later on. Later on.
But you know,
the joy will not grow you so much as the fire
I'm not
does.
removing the storm away, but I am with you.
I hear you.
I'm with you.
I hear you.
You're not alone.
My friend, Reverend Matthew Smualwa says, when a man beats you, you fight back. When God holds your hand and beats you or touches you, even what you are saying joyfully, we cry. And it is so true. You may, and we often do meet God in the fire and through the fire. We do meet God in the waters,
Yes.
but we also meet God in some very sweet moments. So yes, you are right, Edmund. Sometimes our tears are tears of joy and God holding our hand and feeling the warmth.
Yes.
And we know that is our Father. He has just given us a hug and we cry.
Now, Pastor Edward, you went into publishing.
Yes, I did.
What inspired? Why did you get into it? And I want us to now dive into something we have in common.
Okay. From the time I was young, I really enjoyed reading. I started reading novels and books when I was probably
James Hadley
10.
Chase.
Yes, from one. My big brothers really enjoyed it.
Yes.
And I used to pick on their novels. I used to admire them. And so I really enjoyed that. I was fairly well proficient in the English language. I love languages a lot. So I found myself in that space. Sometime when I went into university, I discovered I have several things that I really enjoy doing. And writing was one of them. So I wrote 2 books of my own. And then my inspiration actually came from my late father because, like all fathers, we took him for granted. He had all these experiences and my father was at Uhuru Gardens when the Union Jack was coming down.
Yes.
And whenever he used to tell us those stories, we found them boring because he used to say them all the time. It is only after he had passed away and I was growing up that I realized those were precious stories. Where were they? So me and my siblings now are writing my father's story posthumously. We had to go to his brother to now start giving us information. And when he did, my uncle kept telling us, were you not aware of how amazing this man was? And honestly, we were not. We took it for granted. Like people take their dads for granted a lot. So after 22 years, I decided I have another gift that I feel is growing inside me and has not found expression. Reverend Gishinga likes to say, once you're a pastor, you're always a pastor. So I knew I'm not losing much, setting that aside to concentrate on this other one. So I started a publishing firm. And I think I'll be honest with you. I'm actually looking for my dad's stories. He's not there.
Yes.
But I'm looking for, there is a cadre of people in our leadership whose stories we don't know. And unfortunately, they are dying off. And it is killing the soul of our nation. It is. We are losing stories and experiences. Our young people are growing up nearly cultureless because of maybe the global influence and everything else. But it's almost difficult to define what a Kenyan culture is because we do not have very, very precious stories from our fathers that need to be captured in a book. And so I started to capture those stories. And pastoral work will get you into people's lives. Mostly you relate with a congregation, which is a very amazing love that you feel. But when you start to specialize a little and get into an individual's life, it has done things to me that I cannot describe to you, Edmund. Reverend Gishinga was my boss for all those years, and I always saw him as a boss and as the person who we look up to in so many ways because he has so many good qualities. But probably he'll tell you about it. But writing Reverend Gishinga's book, reading his book, I read his memoirs, and I felt like I didn't know him. I have now discovered his family, his brothers, his sisters, his experiences. I have cried tears looking at where he came from, nearly died many times, but full of a story full of God's grace, how he came into his pastoral call. Those things were not coming out in sermons. They were not. He was coming out as a leader and a boss that time. But more recently, I can say, Reverend Gishinga, I can say it with a lot of confidence. He's my friend. I feel like I love him differently. friend that everybody has a story. It is true. And it's a story worth telling.
You know,
That's why I'm in that space.
Gishinga, you always pen in preparing the notes for your sermons, but aside from that, in capturing your stories, how many books have you written before you come into now the most recent one? And what inspired or triggered?
Essentially, this is only the second book. I wrote a book when Emmy died, and I was in a hole. I couldn't see the world around me. I actually wanted to, I was working in my mind. I had given God an agenda that I want to die within between 5 and 7 years. And I was not going to commit suicide. That has never been on my mind. But I didn't see the purpose of living beyond 5-7 years after 2010. And because when you go through pain and grieving, it's almost like a curtain is drawn over your face. So what I decided to do, and that I didn't know where I was going. You talked about an artist, but the two of you talked about an artist is pouring emotions. I didn't know I had an artist in me, but writing Cry of the Heart, because that was the title, Cry of the Heart, was bearing my emotions, but more even bearing Emmy's emotions, because she died of breast cancer, discovered a little too late, between stages 3 and 4. So within 10 months of the discovery, and going through chemo and radio and surgery, within 10 months, she was gone. But Emmy used to be a writer.
Oh.
She used to write books on counseling. Yeah. And so she used to journal. And so what I did is to go into her journal and extract many of the things she had written, the emotions she was going through. And it was so interesting, Edmund, that after completing that manuscript, it's like a curtain opened before me.
Yeah.
And I no longer wanted to live 5-7 years. I started thinking,
there's more.
There is a girl that I knew called Noel Kituto.
Yes.
I know she is living somewhere in Asia. I'm not even sure which country. And I went to my friend Stanley Kebathi to ask for her address. Something happened after I wrote.
Yes.
And now I want to live another 30 years.
Well done.
This is your agenda for yourself now.
So that was my first book, Cry of the Heart. It was more the journey of Emmy and me being a caregiver to her, and left as a husband and with 2 children to look after. So this is the second book.
And the title is, wow, it is very interesting. In bracket, why not me? Why that title?
It is a title that the publisher, Hadithi, and us have come up together with. And it is why not me and why me?
Why me?
It is both questions. And it is a recognition that God has taken me through some very deep highs, not just some very deep lows, but also some very deep highs. For example, I was invited to work with students in colleges and universities in what we call FOCUS, Fellowship of Christian Unions. In 1974, when I had only earlier that year left university and been posted as a high school teacher, I was only 24 going to 25, and I was put in charge of universities and colleges in 8 countries in the region. And I keep asking Professor George Kenoti, why? He gives me an answer for that, which I will not give here. But you see God putting you in a situation and you ask, why me? Why a 24-year-old going to 25 in charge of that? After that, at only age 33, this was 9 years later, put together with Mutava Musiemi as pastors of the Nairobi Baptist Church, which was a very unique congregation in 1983. Very unique in the city. Thriving. Nairobi Chapel, Mavuno, Sitam, where we are, they have gone into youth ministry. At that time, it is Nairobi Baptist Church which was the pioneer in youth ministry. Why put me together with Reverend Mutava Musiemi to pioneer that kind of ministry which has significantly affected and impacted not only this country, but actually this continent and beyond. Later on, when I retired from Nairobi Baptist Church after 25 years, I became global chaplain of World Relief. About 17 offices in the USA, 3 in Asia, 8 here in Africa, 2 in Latin America. Why me? So that is the peak. But on the downside, the pain that I have already described, and Emmy wasn't the end. The death of Emmy wasn't the end.
Yes.
Our son has gone through multiple things.
Yes, Mwema.
Mwema has lost sight when COVID came. COVID found him diabetic, took his eyes off, both of them. He's totally blind. He had a couple of strokes and has to walk either with a walker or something, a cane.
And you know, and Reverend Gishinga, that really, for me, is something that I would invite us.
Yes.
Capture our stories, our memoirs in any form, written or otherwise, but inspired. And you, the viewer, would want to be part of this. I know we're having a launch soon in February. Watch this space. We'll unpack more. That was just the tidbits. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable, sharing, unpacking. I couldn't have wished for a better set, as the Lord wills. Well,
Thank you.
10 seconds parting shot. I know my director wants to kick me out. What would you say? If I give you 10 seconds, say something.
It is right to question God. It is right to have a conversation with God, because our God is secure. He is a secure Father. He is a secure leader. It is right to pour out our emotions because He is our friend. Anybody out there, have a conversation with our Father in heaven.
You have 6 seconds.
My 6 seconds are to celebrate Reverend John Gishinga for writing his memoirs that allow him to be able to share with all of us his intriguing story. I describe him as a man with a heart of a child in terms of responding to God, but with the skin of a rhino in facing life's challenges. His book comes out 24th of February the next month. Look out for it. It will be in bookstores.
Well, and we thank you for the privilege of your time. This has been The Leader. Tell a friend to tune in. See you next week. My name is Edmund Mudibo. God bless.